Now it gives me the great pleasure to welcome Geoffrey Nobes, who's going to be joining us and talking about his piece, Prelude on Lavenham. So, Geoffrey, it's fantastic to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Matthew, hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. I think, apart from the miserable weather, not too bad.
Good.
So, as I said, you're going to be speaking to us a bit about your piece, Prelude on Lavenham. And
yeah, Matthew, can I just say one thing before we start? When I was a lad playing solo cornet in Portsmouth Citadel, my idol was Philip's dad. And my best record, I played it 3 times a week. And Matthew, I have it here, was an LP called Star Spangled Band Music. Okay, it's the New York Staff Band, a male chorus, Great Britain tour, 1960. And on it, staff bandsman Derek Smith is playing Songs in the Heart. And I listened to that until the record wore out. So that's quite a good link with Phil.
Excellent stuff. We love a bit of a link continuity. Yeah. So back to your music. Thank you for the music as well. First of all, this piece, the Prelude on Lavenham, has been hugely popular with South Army bands over the last few years in the UK and certainly around the world as well. When did you first start to notice the popularity that this piece had attained?
I think perhaps, Matthew, it was when Steve Cobb started playing it with the ISB, which was shortly after its first performance at Lavenham back in 2014. And I started having emails from all sorts of people saying they'd acquired the music, which, you know, it goes around, which is great. People were using it. And then the ISB played it on their tour of Australia. And I had some wonderful emails from people in Australia saying how much it had moved them. And Steve very kindly passed on emails that he'd received about people who'd been moved by the music and the words. So I think that was it, really. And then generally, just over the years, more and more performances seem to come on YouTube of bands inside the army and contesting bands and so on, which is a bit ironic, Matthew, because I only composed it for one performance, which was for the first performance in Lavenham Parish Church. And I thought I'd be grateful just to hear it once, and I did. But yeah, so I suppose that's really when Steve first took it over the ISB and it began to be wider known. Yeah.
Fantastic, and thank goodness it's been picked up, and we've had a job. So, as you alluded to, spiritually, this piece has impacted many people. Did the process of writing the music for you have any impact on your faith?
I think it did, through Nick's amazing words. You know, it talks about everybody having questions, which we all do, especially, as Phil was saying, in these very troubled times. And I think Nick's words, especially in the last verse, you know, Lord, there are times when the questions run fast. Times when I fear that my faith may not last. Help me, support me, Lord. Help me get through. And then the last line, which is just so beautiful, lead me through darkness till light shines anew. And I think that's good for all of us, isn't it? And sometimes we doubt our faith, and sometimes there are questions that are unanswerable. But as Phil was saying, faith is the bedrock, and it carries us through.
So I believe this was your first Salvation Army published piece. Was this your first time writing for brass band, though?
Absolutely not. When I was a lad, I went to Tilney Hall for a number of years and thoroughly enjoyed it. Well, who wouldn't? Under the directorship of Les Condon. I remember Les was such an inspiring leader and inspiring teacher. And he encouraged some of us to write pieces and take them to Tilney Hall, and he played them through with the A band. Some of them were more interesting than others, and, you know, people trying scoring and so on. I think in my first year, I wrote a cornet duet. Can't remember what it was called, but I played it, one of the solo parts. The second year, when I was 17, I wrote a festival march called Portsmouth Citadel, which had every sea shanty, Matthew, you can imagine in it. Started with the basses going dum bum bum dum, which made my father's eyebrow go up, because, you know, my dad was bandmaster at Portsmouth for 45 years, and he played it with Portsmouth Band as well. And I think I wrote a meditation in the next year. And then in 1975, for the finals of my music degree, I wrote a piece called Prelude on Compostores, which I sent to the editorial board at the time. And they sent a lovely letter back saying, we very much like this piece and the scoring, but it's a little too Anglican for our use. So things have changed a bit, haven't they, Matthew, in the years?
Absolutely. So composers are often influenced by other composers when they're writing. Are there any composers or compositions that influence this piece, the Prelude on Lavenham?
Yeah, I was going to say snap listening to Phil, Eric Ball and Wilfred Eaton. I was really privileged, Matthew, in 2005 to be asked to conduct at a wonderful concert, which was the 125th celebration of Portsmouth Citadel Band, because I've been bandmaster in the past. And that was in a beautiful church in Portsmouth. And they asked me what I wanted to conduct. And I said, well, only one choice, Just As I Am. And there were, almost 100 previous bandsmen who'd come for that concert. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. That music it says more in 4.5 minutes than other pieces say in 18 minutes, you know? And of course, the other great iconic figure, of course, is Eric Ball. I remember as a deputy bandmaster at Portsmouth, a very young deputy, being privileged to drive Eric back to his home from Portsmouth after a band weekend where Eric was the guest. And it was the most extraordinary hour of my life. Eric was talking about his faith, his extraordinary music, and his scoring. And that journey is seared on my brain, especially when he said, Geoffrey, never forget when you're conducting, build from the bases upwards. And that was Eric. So yeah, Eric Ball, Wilfred Eaton, glorious, glorious music.
If only someone had recorded that conversation, it would have made a great podcast.
It certainly would.
So the words, as you alluded to earlier, were written by the Reverend Nick Fawcett. Where did you first encounter these words?
I was asked to write a new hymn tune by my publisher, Kevin Mayhew. That was in 2004. And they were about to publish a new hymn book, which is called Hymns Old and New. And I have a copy in the bookshelf just above me. So basically, they just arrived in the post. And I set the music and sent it back, and they published it in the book. And the nice thing was that when I remember being up at Lavenham, because we visited quite a lot, and my wife and I have been up because we still have friends in Lavenham, and I mentioned this to them, and the army in Lavenham took up the song, and also the church in Lavenham took up the song, which was really nice. So really, that was the first time I'd seen the words. Yeah. So
what was the inspiration behind writing that actual tune? Was there any thoughts that came into your head about how the tune should sound and associating it with those words?
Yes, I was asked to write the arrangement by a wonderful man at Lavenham Corps called Robert Holmes, one of the stalwarts of Lavenham Salvation Army. Wonderful, wonderful group of Salvationists up there in the tiny village. And this was for their 130th anniversary in 2014. And they were to have a concert in Lavenham Parish Church, played by Kettering Citadel Band. Now, I don't know if you know the area, but East Anglia is full of these amazing, amazing churches built on the wool trade in the medieval era. They're enormous. They're like cathedrals. And so I was delighted to write the hymn tune arrangement. I called it a prelude. It sounds a bit posher, you know. And Margaret and I went up for the first performance. It was midsummer, June 2014, and we listened to the first performance of Lavenham in Lavenham Parish Church, which was very special indeed.
Fantastic. I do know East Anglia very well. I was born and raised in Norwich. So
wow, very good.
Picture what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So in reading the score notes, or another one of your published pieces that you mentioned earlier, actually, the Prelude on Quem Pastores, you mentioned that piece was written with the acoustics of Portsmouth Cathedral in mind, where the piece was to have its premiere. When writing the Prelude on Lavenham, how much did that consideration of acoustics come into mind for that inaugural performance?
Very, very much so. I was privileged to go to a school that had links with Portsmouth Cathedral, and we did lots of concerts in Portsmouth Cathedral, and that acoustic sound world was part of my childhood, you know. And I think there's nothing better than a good brass band playing in a cathedral or a resonant church. Of course, you've got to choose your repertoire, haven't you? You know, but if you play suitable music and it's right, there is nothing like it. And so, yes, when I was asked to write Lavenham for Lavenham Parish Church, I had that wonderful wide acoustic in mind. And you know, the most wonderful thing was we drove up on that first performance in June 2014. We went early. in the afternoon, went up to the church and met friends from Lavenham, including Maureen Wilding, who is the widow of Derek Wilding, to whom the piece is dedicated. He was a bandmaster at Lavenham. And as we walked up the church into Lavenham Parish Church, I heard the music of Lavenham being played from inside by Kettering Band. And that's a moment I won't forget. That was very moving. But yes, the acoustic really does matter in Quem Pastores, as much as Lavenham, really, yes.
And so when you were writing the original tune, I think you said around 2004, was it ever in your head that you would do an arrangement or the prelude on the piece, or was that an inspiration that came?
No, later? No, absolutely not. That was precisely because Rob rang and said, look, do you fancy writing this? And I really hadn't written anything for brass band since 1975. So I thought, right, let's get the brain working, see if I can remember how to score for brass band. And what was so lovely, Matthew, was that set the ball in motion. And I'm sure you've heard that the story that Steve Cobb tells, that after that first performance in Lavenham Parish Church, the music sort of migrated, which it does, you know, and it ended up with the Anglia Fellowship Band. Ray Todd is the conductor. And Steve went down to a rehearsal of the Anglia Fellowship Band to look at some of the new tunes for the new Army Tune Book. And at the end of the rehearsal, Ray said to Steve, we've got 5 minutes to spare. Would you like to run this piece through? It's in manuscript. And Steve looked at it and said, is this the Geoffrey Nobes I knew 40 years ago at Tilney Hall? And he played it through and emailed me and said, could we use it with the ISB? And I said, oh, I think you probably could, yes. And so that's where it all came from. And I've been writing other stuff now, and it's all come from that one moment, which was really lovely. I said to Steve, it's a coincidence. He said, no, that's not a coincidence. He said it was meant to happen. So
great stuff. And my final question for you, Geoff, before we listen to your piece and just take a moment to reflect and listen to the beauty of the music and respond to those words in our own hearts. It's quite a personal question, but is there a particular performance or recording of the piece that's been special to you?
Yeah, good question, Matthew. I think obviously the first one was really magical, with the sunlight coming through the windows of Lavenham Church and all our friends from Lavenham there. It was very special. There's another lovely performance too. Margaret and I went down to the Lighthouse at Poole, to the Territorial Youth Band and Choir. Wonderful concert they give in February. Steve asked us down, and he played Lavenham with the band, and that was very special. And of course, Steve's recording with the ISB is just iconic, with the wonderful video and pictures they put to it. So yes, those three, I think, are the ones that really, really stand out.
Brilliant. And we're now going to listen to that recording from the ISB and the video of that now. And we invite you, the listeners, just to take a few moments to reflect to the words, really poignant words for the situation we find ourselves in today. And I dare say that we'll find ourselves in the future. Let's have a listen to that. we'll have a few words now in prayer from Jeff.
I thought it'd be really lovely to have some words from Nick Fawcett, who wrote the words to Lavenham. And so here they are. So many are worried, Lord. Calm their fears. So many are hurting. Tend their wounds. So many are grieving. Comfort them. So many are lonely. Assure them of your presence. So many are vulnerable. Protect them. So many are in need, Lord. Reach out to them in love, in tenderness and mercy, and see them safely through. Amen.